Hey, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you so much all for joining up. So this was my job market paper as well the last semester, and I'm now kind of in the transition of rewriting this job market paper to a more like real academic publishable paper. It kind of narrowed down all the research questions I aim to answer. So the paper I'm going to present today, When to Go Green, Thermodynamics and Clean Technology Adoption. So it relates to, I'm also starting with this news articles. So in many countries, the EU is an example, but also regions like in Canada, California, many have put a price on carbon. And they mainly have done so through a cap and trade system. It's the more popular thing to do. But what many people have seen as well is that the price of these cap and trade system is often extremely low, with 5, 6, 7, 8 euros per ton emissions. And you could ask yourself, and many people have done so, does this really bite firms in their marginal cost? And would firms really reduce their emissions? Would firms really invest into new clean technologies if the price is so low? But on the other hand, you have people from the industry, and they're saying that we have to be very careful because it's carbon policy. This might hurt us. This might hurt our competitiveness of the firms, and this might kill off manufacturing firms in the long run. And to an extreme example, this might even lead to carbon leakage, where a certain region, the domestic region, reduces their emissions, but this comes at the cost of increased emissions in a different country. So to kind of reconciliate both of those views, I aim to write this paper actually, and I kind of distilled 2 research questions out of this. The first one being, why do firms actually still invest when the price of carbon is that low? Because you see in empirical literature that many of these firms actually do reduce their emissions, they do invest into capital. Why do they do so? And the second one, as a follow-up question, is then, how credible is this threat of carbon policies? Do they really kill off manufacturing, or is this just kind of a red herring and it's nothing really happening? So that was kind of the main, those research questions were the main ones I started. And if you then zoom into the EU ETS as a kind of aggregate case study, the EU ETS is a prime example, not only because it's the longest one, not only because it's one of the more larger cap and trade systems in the world, but also because it has a very credible pledge. We know that from all the policies by the EU, that the net zero has to be achieved by 2050. And the EU has set their EU ETS to kind of reduce by a certain percentage, 2.2% each year, to achieve net zero by 2050. You see here in the black line is the EU ETS of how they expect that emissions will go. And in the blue bars, you see how they're actually going right now. And you see that the actual emissions of the EU follow the carbon cap by definition, by construction, they follow it quite well. And then you see through the carbon price, which is kind of the market clearing price of where the demand of emissions is set, fits the supply of the emissions. And it was extremely low in the beginning, as we discussed beforehand, but now, as you might know as well, it's rising to approximately 60, 70 euros per ton emissions, actually. So the reason, so what I want to do in this paper...
Sorry, can I ask you something? There's just one concept that you're referring repeatedly that I don't even understand or disagree with you. Why do you say that regardless of the number, the cost is low or high? Isn't the idea of the trade system to precisely mimic the cost theorem? So whatever the price it is, it's its social value. So it is what it is, quote unquote. Why do you say that it should be lower, higher? This is the part I'm not understanding.
I mean, this is what was in the public debate quite often, where like they say, this is quite low. And what I'm trying to
insist on this point. I mean, the idea is precisely whatever is the number, low or high, is that if the trading system works well, it should reflect the social cost of carbon. Right? It's obvious from the y-axis that we see that it's not reflecting that based on other estimates. So what's wrong with the trading system there such that then it's not reflecting the social value?
So the reason being is the forward-looking nature of the firms, because the firms expect they invest. This means that in the future they invest because they expect in the future the price will be much, much higher, that the cap is much more stringent. And therefore this this reduces the price right now already, actually, because of the because their investment, they will emit less CO2 emissions, and therefore they the market clearing price will be achieved.
So then this is good, I guess. Right?
Yeah, no. I'm saying this is very good. This is my whole point is saying that this should be a rational. This is rational. Yeah. So indeed, no, this is a good thing. Like the 6-7 euros per ton emissions is actually not as bad, not as low implied.
Okay, we can follow up on this because I guess just eventually the way of calling it.
No, actually that's true. But I should have made
it
first. Yeah. So anyways, what I do in this model, this paper, I propose an estimated dynamic discrete choice model, a model where firms can adopt new clean technologies and become cleaner when they're faced with this ever-tightening unilateral policy, when they know that that the carbon policy is going to be much more stringent in the future, actually. The firms are forward-looking, and they face this ever-tightening carbon policy, and they can invest into this new clean technologies, but it's going to be costly. It's kind of the sunk cost, so they can't do it overnight. They have to do it gradually, and over time they become cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. Additionally, to kind of look at this competition that we discussed earlier, this threat from the industry, where like it's going to kill competition, it's going to distort. The competition will be unfair. It's going to distort it. I allow for heterogeneity in both clean technology and firms and observed productivity. And for the carbon leakage story, to examine that one, I embed this model into a two-country model where the EU sets the carbon policy unilaterally. So, and what do I find? This forward-looking nature of the firms really mitigates the aggregate impact, actually. Just like what we discussed earlier, because emission adjustment is slow, the firms kind of front load already their investment decisions. They become cleaner when the price is not really binding yet, and therefore, as emissions as the cap is going to be more expensive, or the price is going to be more expensive, they already have invested quite a lot, and therefore, the aggregate demand is not as affected as it would be without this kind of forward guidance or forward-looking nature. And in terms of numbers, from the model, I estimate that this would lead to a GDP loss of about 0.5% right now, and about 2% in 2050. And here again, I really want to stress this point. Actually, it's because if this forward-looking nature was not into place, the prices would affect aggregate GDP much more, and it would double the losses right now, and it would even triple the losses more than triple the losses in 2050. This is kind of the whole framework to start off this paper, actually. And of course, we can then actually look at counterfactual analysis. In the paper, I have done a few. One obvious one would be a carbon border adjustment mechanism, adoption subsidies, etc. But what this model can do that other models can't in this literature is actually really look at this trajectory, really look at here this cap and say, is this trajectory to achieve net zero, is it the optimal trajectory actually that the EU has set? Would it have been better to go slower? This would have increased cumulative emissions much more. But on the other hand, it would have reduced the effect of the policy on aggregate demand. In contrast, if you would have gone much more convex,
oh, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Sorry, I thought you had your answer. Oh, sorry. If it would have gone much more convex, then aggregate output losses would have been much higher, but this would have reduced aggregate emissions. No?
Okay. Yeah. I just wasn't interrupting mid-sentence. Super interesting. I guess I'm curious, when you think about the optimal trajectory, like how do you think about the role of credibility and commitment? Like I see that the uncertainty bands are kind of like only after 2050 here, but what's happening in practice is, I mean, I think like just yesterday, Germany backed off of a bunch of their carbon commitments, and like a lot of countries are saying, in 2040 we'll do X, and 2030 we'll do X, and 2028 comes around and they're like, just kidding. I guess I'm curious, like, are you thinking, is that like a next paper, or are you thinking about that in this paper?
That's definitely next paper, yes. But I did think about it because indeed something I haven't showed you yet actually is like in 2021 they actually changed this trajectory as well, where now it actually goes back to 2040 the ETS, and it's reducing by 4.3% each year. So yes, so this model assumes that firms expect this to be credible. From a political point of view, this is a bit of a strong assumption, but like I need this in order for the model to work.
But I think you can use your model to test that assumption or to think about how credibility matters. Like it could be the case that I think it could be the case that like lying is optimal in your model. Like you say in 2025, like we're going to reduce emissions so much in 2030 or 2040, you get all the firms to invest. And then like 2040 comes around and you're like, actually, like we don't need to do anything anymore. We can have a loose cap.
That's a very good point actually. Like I have done something similar in the sense where like I allow for this forward guidance mechanism where I say, okay, the cap is not binding at all until 2050, and then it's zero. So and then what you see is like firms omit a bit more, but in the end they will adopt as well because they know that's like they have to, otherwise they have to close essentially, right? So they will, but like the whole political economy debate, I haven't really haven't looked into it that much. I am a bit skeptical in that sense because I think that the uncertainty that comes from that one, I also need to estimate the parameters, and then I get into this kind of double variation issue.
I mean, I had some very similar thought, but I think within I think Ishan's point is really interesting that you could potentially use the model to think about within the sorts of observed ranges of changes in commitments. Or, I mean, obviously the determinants of that, the kind of broader political economy, what other countries are doing and so on, is not something that needs to be endogenized in the model, but within plausible ranges, how much does that affect your conclusion? Because that's kind of the first order political economy of the path, really.
Was that a question there?
Feel free to defer this if it's going to come up later on, but I'm just wondering how firms form beliefs over the decarbonization technology. If I think that it's going to get better over time, I mean, if you can back this out of the model in the same way as whether or not they believe the commitments.
Oh, yeah. So yeah, that's actually the double variation kind of was I hinting at. So what I do is simply put, they know that the price will decrease in a constant with a constant technological progress. I do extend this later into this kind of Romer type model, but there is no uncertainty about the technological progress environment in this. No. About coming back to your point, actually, like I do allow for different social cost of carbon and see how it matters in a trajectory. Actually, so I've done a bit of that, but no uncertainty.
But including changes during the path.
That's something I have not thought of in that extent to know whether I can. It's feasible.
Would be something like if the firm does versus does not anticipate a change in the social cost of carbon on which it's based in 10 years' time.
Yeah. That's a good point. So in terms of the literature, I'll be quite quick actually, but this kind of combines two literatures into one paper. So there was this whole literature on trade and abatement, and they all use kind of static models, and I go beyond in introducing this dynamic framework. And on the other hand, you have this whole dynamic setting, but it's very often considered to be quite aggregate on the country level or on the whole world level. And I kind of want to introduce the heterogeneity in that sense, actually. So combining those. And there is also the whole literature, the empirical literature on the EU ETS, which I relate to as well. So the model, I won't introduce that many equations, but just a few. This is the main equation of the text. Actually, this is the Bellman equation. So firms, they're profit maximizing, and they maximize their forward-looking as well, and they can choose their level of clean technology. So sorry, my apologies. So I will start from the beginning. So they have the level of clean technology, which I call A, the level of unobserved productivity, Z, and they can choose to increase their level of clean technology, become greener, and omit less through setting through a whole decision set, actually, discrete decision set. And the price of carbon, they know, and it's going to change with T. It's going to be more stringent. They condition on that. So whenever they increase their level of clean technology, they increase this with a factor chi. And you can kind of think about this from a quality ladder point of view, where you increase your level of clean technology on a step-size increase and become cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. And as time goes on, reach infinity and reach your backstop technology and become completely clean. Of course, they have the option to wait as well, do nothing, wait for the next period. Can be optimal if the shock is high enough or the price is not binding enough, and then just wait until the price is reached. Yeah.
And I guess the trade-off intuitively of your framework is precisely this psi cost, the marginal cost, against the expected increase in the carbon prices that the firms will have to face in the future.
Yeah.
Right. So the firm decides to invest this psi today to avoid the increase in the carbon price in the future.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
And why can this psi change over time? For instance, firms, like the cost of solar panel over decades massively decreased.
Mm-hmm. Oh, but like it can decrease over time, actually. So I lie. Not the XI. So the XI is fixed, but the cost you have to pay to increase the XI is decreasing over time.
Okay. So that.
So yeah. So indeed, like exactly for your point, actually. So indeed, we know technological progress is happening in clean technology. We know it's going to get cleaner. So the ease of stepping up the quality ladder is going to is cheaper, actually. And it's not a fixed XI. There are different variations of XI, so you can step 1%, 2%, 5%, 10%, etc. So,
wondering about the market structure here. I mean, you set this up as a single agent problem, but a lot of these industries like energy are going to have just a few dominant firms. I mean, are they thinking about how if another firm invests, I don't have to invest? I mean, you're going to capture that in some way, or is it just going to be? Maybe they're small, and then it doesn't matter.
No, so it's in that sense, it's just a simple Mills type model, monopolistic competition. So all the indirect effects come through the aggregate price index, actually. So there is no real, strategic behavior. If the firm does something, the other firm does that. And yes, this is from the perspective of one firm, but you could. Yeah, so it's just the indirect effect that's that.
And then where is pi coming from? And is there going to be product market competition coming through pi?
So
if it's coming, defer it.
Yeah. So it's here actually. So first I'm going to introduce one other equation, then we come back to pi actually. So in the short run, you could think of emissions as being Leontief with respect to output. Within the year, you can't really change your input structure anymore. You're stuck with what you have. The only way to reduce your emissions is to kind of reduce your output and produce less. And this is actually what the government you don't really want. You don't really want to reduce aggregate demand. You just want to make sure that firms increase their clean technology. And firms, when they increase their clean technology, very simple, then emissions become less. And if clean technology reaches infinity, emissions will be zero again. In terms of in terms of profits, in terms of pi, then it is essentially just a typical Millets model where you have your prices and your monopolistic competition. So you set your aggregate demand through the price index, of the prices and the price index. And I just consider wages to be fixed. And the only novel thing in terms of the typical trade model is this kind of carbon policy where firms do internalize their emissions as well. But only through this is an assumption, of course, but only through the carbon policy. From the moment the carbon policy is set off, from the moment that the government does not set a carbon policy, you're just back into this typical trade model, and firms do not internalize emissions in any other way than through this one. Now, in terms of the aggregate transition, this is transition economy. As the word says itself, the green transition, you want to go to a decarbonized state of the world. So how I set this up is in 2005, the beginning of the EU ETS, 2008, nothing was essentially going on. firms where the government was improvising with this new policy. They were seeing what do the firms think about it, what can we do. So I use this as a balanced growth path, as a steady state situation, and I take this and take this to a period in the very, very distant future where all firms are clean, and then you can do a kind of a backwards induction to go backwards towards this state and see how the firms have just their clean technology. Now, in terms of the aggregate price, this is set through market clearing, as I said before, actually, as you see in the graph, which I now resume. This is set by the government. This is known to all firms. All firms know how the cap would evolve, and maybe indeed I can play around a bit with that one as well. Set some uncertainty on this one, and then the aggregate demand is then set to equate that setting. Now, in terms of the trade thing, I'm not going to be very. I'm going to be very brief on this one. It's just a passive economy. The passive economy of the foreign economy is just passive. It doesn't do anything. Everything is happening through the domestic economy, which I consider to be the EU.
So why do you have the second country?
To just at the beginning it was it's mainly there for carbon leakages actually. So the competition can play out of the effects of the policy can play out on competition can play out to two margins, like the direct effect of the effect on within the country where the cleaner firms might benefit through this effect, and for the polluting firms they might get an unfair advantage. Well, the second hand, you also have the foreign country, which I assume has no policy in place, and you can this can generate an additional level of competition.
So is there going to be an option for firms to relocate? I guess this.
In a version of the model which I have in the appendix, there is.
Okay.
It's quite difficult to calibrate though, because the decision does not happen in the data. So in the baseline version of the model, I don't have it in there. Yeah. So competition only plays out through intensive margin with the foreign country. Okay. So in terms of the data I use the EU transaction log data and combined with financial data from Orbis. So just a fairly standard data set, and I use the data from the European manufacturing firms from 2005 to 2019. Just 2019, just before COVID, because that kind of dilutes the whole data set. And then what you can see in this model is the fact that, in this data, is the fact that these firms are large. There's no extensive margin going on. Firms don't really enter, firms don't really exit. These are firms which have like almost 1,000 employees. These are incumbents and are here to stay. So, and indeed, if you look at the data, you also see it that this is a story driven by incumbents actually. So there is no real room for creative destruction. You don't see in the data that the green firms is taking over the market share. The polluting firms are affected. It's very much a story of the polluting firms reducing their emissions, investing in new clean technologies, and therefore getting green over time, actually. So what do I do now? I estimate the model. For the model, you need both the state variables as well as the decision to adopt new clean technologies. So the clean technology of the productivity variable, I can just back out using this productivity estimator from Jan de Loeker and Asker Cox-Rexer and so forth. And the clean technology thing follows from the Leontief assumption. Finally, I need the dynamic discrete adoption decision as well, but I don't know how we're doing on time, so I might skip
5 minutes.
5 minutes. So that's why that's a good way to skip. If we can come back to it if you want to afterwards. And in terms of the estimation, I just use backwards induction, where you go from the very far distant future and you just calculate backwards. This is a non-stationary environment, so it's this way to do so. And what I find in terms of results, first one small validation exercise. This is indeed the model predicts the carbon price to be extremely low as well, actually. Yeah, there is but only until 2020, and then it will slowly ramp up until it reaches its peak somewhere around 1,000, 1,500 prices per ton emissions at 2050, and then it will slowly go back to zero when full decarbonization is reached.
How do you address the fact that in some years borrowing and banking were allowed, but in other years they were forbidden, right? In the EU ETS.
So you mean the banking of certificates?
Yes, banking of permits.
So in the model, it's not allowed. So in the model, it's very simple. Just the certificates has to be used in the year. It does happen. But as far as I could see in the data, it's quite marginal. So it does, and maybe in the beginning a bit more in 2005, 2008. But then it was because firms did not really know what to do. But now in recent years, it doesn't happen that much. Indeed, you could say that for the spot prices of the carbon, there might be some trading going on. So the prices might be a bit higher in the data than there would be in the model. So that's what I find for the later years, actually. But yeah, so I don't allow for it. Yes. And there is also not a really clean way to extend the model to do that. Otherwise, you get into computational issues, unfortunately. But now the main result of the paper essentially is how will the EU ETS evolve over time? And you see that in the black line, black dashed line, it will go to approximately 2% per year in 2050, and then slowly creep back up to 0% in 2080, approximately. And the reason being is like you have this, you can kind of decompose this into this direct effect, the effect of the carbon policy on aggregate outputs of aggregate GDP, but also this mitigating effect of adoption, actually. So the price will affect output this much, but because firms adopt their new clean technologies, they become cleaner, and therefore they will will kind of evade what the policy would have done if they would not have adopted, actually. And this adoption channel, so here I plotted it, the red of the blue line, increases over time to this kind of spike in 2050, and then slowly ramps up to 100% in 2080, where the whole economy will be completely clean and the carbon policy will essentially not exist anymore because the whole economy is clean.
One question about this also, I guess, is that, I mean, one thing people worry about, I guess, is whether or not adoption is going to have an effect not just on levels, but on growth. So like in your model, these things all peter out by 2100. Are you able to separate that in some way or speak to whether or not there'll be impacts on the growth portion?
So how I think about adoption in this channel, you could think of as a convex combination of like the clean technology parameter in this channel, like the convex combination of different type of capital, like this vintage you could think of. So in that sense, no, you could mainly consider it as an input factor, and therefore I don't allow for it like the way I don't allow for it in this setting of the model. Could I do more? I'm not sure, actually. That's the first time I get this question. Actually, not. I fear not. Very simply put, but I'm not sure. So I've got 1 minute left, you said. So in that sense, I'm going to be very fast. So you can think of there are many trajectories to achieve net zero, actually, to go back to 2050. The red line is the line that the EU has chosen with the EU ETS. But with this model, I'm able to kind of compute optimal trajectories given different kind of social cost of carbon. How would this convexity evolve to achieve this thing given social cost of carbon? And then indeed, coming back to the previous point, if you put the price to zero, the social cost of carbon to zero, then you still have this forward guidance at play where firms know that they have to reduce their emissions to in 2050 because it's a hard constraint, and they will still do so. And then you will get this dashed line. On the other hand, if you take this very high social cost of carbon, which is now used in the literature by Bilal and Kanzig, you get this extremely convex line, actually. So there are different lines in order to achieve net zero, and
This depends a lot on the discount factor, right? I guess.
yeah. So the discount factor is just the Kolosov paper, and I just don't say anything. And I'm going to stop with one more sentence. This allows me to also back out the implied social cost of carbon that the EU has set as thought of when setting the EU ETS, and that's 81 euros per ton emissions actually. So much higher than we were discussing in the previous decade.
Can you use that display? I am sure it's have to set it up, so I would not fiddle with it. But you want to use it? No. Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Can you try again? All right.
Thanks for including my paper. So I'm Takana Tanaka from UC Berkeley. I'm fifth year and I'm gonna go to the job market next year. And this is going to be my job market paper. So this is a joint project with the Daiji College. He's actually there, visiting UCL. And I'm presenting electricity supply shocks and manufacturers evidence from Fukushima nuclear accident. Okay, I'm gonna start with a puzzle. So shocks to inputs with small expenditure share could cause large output losses. So this is well-documented patterns in macroeconomic literature, especially on the oil shocks. So oil accounts for a small fraction of GDP, but for example, in the United States, a major recession over the past half centuries always follow the price increase in energy market. Papers attribute these patterns to different factors, including monetary policies or sectoral reallocation frictions or production networks. However, we know somewhat less about the micro foundation of these responses. So we know little about how plants and firms respond to the shocks and the effectiveness of those responses. To fill the gap, we study adverse shocks to the electricity market. Our electricity market itself has become increasingly important over decades. Now, society may face the risk of persistently high electricity prices due to geopolitical risks, like the experiences of the European energy crisis induced by Russia's invasion to Ukraine. Electricity demand is heightened and the grid is fragmented and posing a challenge in the market. And we are under the clean energy transitions, meaning that we cannot rely on dirty energy sources. So that big picture question that
Yeah, sorry, can I ask a question on the first slide? I know it's rude to ask a question on the first slide. But I'm gonna do it anyway. I guess I'm curious, I'm a little confused why this is a puzzle. I thought like a low elasticity of substitution across inputs was sufficient to explain a big aggregate response to a small share. So is that not true?
that is a parameter that we want to kind of back up in the empirical analysis. And then what I mean by this is the puzzle is that like the many kind of oil shock papers start with kind of predictions. So like electricity expenditure share is like 2% in our case, and oil is like 3-4%. And then theories kind of suggested that if like 3% share, maximum like output reduction would be like 3% in a very simple model. Or so that is a kind of a starting point that I have. But your intuition is correct, and that is something that we want to argue.
I would avoid the wording puzzle, you know, just to avoid eventually this confusion at the first line.
Yeah, that may be fair. Yeah,
Just to think about.
okay. So again, the question that we want to address is: do shocks to the electricity market cause large output losses, and if so, why? The idea of this paper is to use electricity supply shocks after Fukushima nuclear accident and its phase out. The shock is pretty large because Japan phased out nuclear power that had generated about 30% of total supply The shock was nationwide and the shock is persistent because at this moment, Japan still does not utilize the majority of nuclear power. Shock led to the price increase, and Japanese government initiated a physical rationing in the form of the information campaign and mandates. We're gonna focus on a manufacturing sector, and we use plant level data from census manufacturers. This is very standard, that covers about 80% in total output. We think there are two contributions. Our first contribution is we focus on large scale and persistent shocks in electricity market. In contrast to the previous papers focusing on small transitory changes in electricity prices. And the second contribution is we use microdata in contrast to the majority of like oil shock papers that is based on like macro, national level data or industrial level data. And today I'm gonna focus on three analysis.
Can I just, oh, sorry.
No, you go. Is there any reason why you're only focusing on manufacturing? For non-tradables, they also use electricity.
Yeah, that is a great point. I think that is, we thought this is kind of like a natural choice. So like the manufacturing sector is like the largest consumer of electricity and the most electricity intensive. But yeah, that is the reason. Yeah.
I guess it changes over time. But
I have another question, just clarifying on scope. So we see a large literature thinking about kind of global supply chain effects of shocks like Fukushima, and this is all from Japanese plants. Do you see anything about the sort of changing nature of their involvement in global supply chains?
So we focus on Japanese plants, and then like supply chain thing is kind of like confounding factor. So that
you see their exports and imports?
No, so that is the census manufacturer does not really have like input output things. So the variation that we're gonna use is some region had the high nuclear shear that are phased out and are facing severe shocks, and other regions do not. And we kind of compare just like output in different regions, and then we abstract away from those input output linkages, but we control for those kind of like factors. Okay, Fukushima nuclear accident and electricity supply shock. Fukushima nuclear accident is one of the worst catastrophes in nuclear history. Japanese citizens were so concerned about the safety of nuclear power, and the government decided to phase out a nuclear power. So y-axis shows the utilization rate of nuclear capacity in the nation. And before 2000,